Oh, let's go, Colts Nation! I am finally back from a brief hiatus. For those of you who have been here before, maybe the hiatus is a little bit funny to you because you know up to this point, I had been promising that I would be here every single week of the offseason with at least one video about these Indianapolis Colts. Now, apparently what I did not know in that is that I should have been prefacing that or following that up by saying every single week, barring I tear my Achilles tendon, right? And how did you do that? How did you do that, Justin? Well, listen, I was running some routes. I was getting some reps. You see, obviously, you know you're here. You know I talk about sports. You know I talk about these Colts. But what you may not know, if you can't tell, is that I'm an elite athlete. I'm in peak physical condition, and I totally was not. This is not what I was doing. I was not just going as hard as I possibly can on the weekend running routes while having little to no activity during the week, because that, of course, would leave you exposed to an injury. That wasn't what I was doing, of course. Lesson for the kids, but I digress. So now you know what this video is going to be about. It's not my Achilles tendon. You saw the title of the video, you saw the thumbnail, and ultimately you decided to click, and I'm grateful that you did. So this one right here is a natural follow-up to the last video I made, which was, 2-3 weeks ago? Feels like 2 or 3 years, quite frankly. Which was 3 trades that I think the Colts should make this offseason, or at least consider at the very least, right? Now, notably, if you had watched that video, trading for the number 1 pick was not in that video. So if it's not something I think the Colts should do, by nature, it's something I think they shouldn't, right? Which ultimately brings me here. And I have my reasons. In fact, reasons that I think are damn good. Which, of course, I'm about to get into. And then I'll probably talk about some other trades being floated around as well that maybe I'm not really loving. But before I do, quickly, if it's your first time here, welcome. You're listening to the Behind the Bench Colts cast. We're probably on episode 8 or something like that. I don't really know. But I'm your host, Justin Alfiero, and I'm recording live from my kind of, messy bedroom studio. I apologize. I know you're not here because of how clean it is, but this is a podcast made by a Colts fan for Colts fans. So if you're a Colts fan and you're looking to help a Colts fan out and you're also enjoying this, just shoot the video a like. It's a one-time deal. And ultimately, it helps me, right? So if you like it, and then you like the video, and then I see that you like it, that's like good for me. And then YouTube sees it, and they're like, holy crap, they like it, right? And all of a sudden, it's this beautiful ecosystem where we're helping each other out. I'm providing you with good content. You're telling YouTube that you like it. And like, this is just like a great thing for everyone, right? Or so I'm trying to convince you of. And then, of course, as for subscribing, you can. I'd be grateful if you did. But ultimately, I'm making this for your entertainment. So if today's not the day you want to subscribe, totally cool. I'm confident I'll get you eventually. And we'll go from there. I think that's basically the entire intro. So why don't we get into the meat of the show here, right? I've made you wait long enough. What has it been? 3 minutes? 4 minutes? So let's get into that number 1 pick. Now, when we as Colts fans talk about this number 1 pick, you have to understand, whether you believe it or not, we have a complete and utter bias. Our views completely skewed as to what it means to have the number 1 overall pick and draft a quarterback there. You have to think, when you look at the past, quarter century, you had like 4 quarterbacks that were considered generational, can't miss, just have to draft them number 1 because, he's like the greatest quarterback ever. There's only been 4 of those guys. Peyton Manning and Andrew Luck, which we had, that's half of them. We've had half of them. And then you have like Joe Burrow and Trevor Lawrence, and maybe I'm missing someone. Obviously, there was other highly touted QB prospects, but I'm talking about guys that were like, that conversation comes up during the draft where it's like, this is the best QB prospect since Troy Aikman, or this is the best since Andrew Luck. Only 4 I could think of. Maybe I'm wrong. And now, of course, you have other guys at the first pick that have been drafted that have had some success, right? You have the, little brother Manning, obviously not as good as ours, but Manning nonetheless. Alex Smith, Cam Newton, right? Matt Stafford, Mike Vick, and funny enough, all those guys were also successful. So, how does this help my point? And a lot of them even have rings, right? You look at Stafford, you look at Newton, you look at Eli, has 2. But let's not forget, right? We can't rewrite history when we have these discussions, at least so I feel. With the exception of Cam Newton and Mike Vick, of everyone that I just named above, which of those guys were franchise-altering, cheat code quarterbacks that were just completely successful in spite of any situation around them? If I'm not mistaken, did Eli ever even make the playoffs if it wasn't winning a Super Bowl, right? In fact, when you look at some of the number one overall picks, you actually end up getting some guys that aren't really all that great, despite the fact that people like them going into the draft. If you're the number one overall pick and you're a quarterback, there had to be enough people that didn't think you were a bum, right? But you look at Baker, who I like, and you look at a Jared Goff recently as well, right? You look at that Baker Mayfield draft. You had the Browns at number 1. You had the Jets at number 3, who traded with us, right? And then you had the Bills at number 7. And I like this example here as to help me out, to help my point out, because you look at the Bills, and they're kind of like us, right? In the sense that they have a team in their division ahead of them. And if they like their quarterback, they might be nervous that their team is going to, you get what I'm saying? That the other team is going to get their guy. Well, the Bills decided to stay put. They decided to not give up the assets, and they decided to see things out. So you got the Browns drafting Baker. You got the Jets drafting Sam Darnold. And then you got the Bills drafting the great Josh Allen. So the rest is history there. Now, you look at the Burrow year recently where he gets drafted to the Bengals. The Chargers obviously had given Rivers to us. Go figure. Just ties in all the time, right? And then you had the Dolphins, who also needed a quarterback. The Chargers did not trade up past the Dolphins because they were scared of the quarterback situation. They stayed put where they were, and probably likely because they just weren't 100% sure as to who they really liked. They didn't view one guy above all the rest. It's my guess. It's speculation. But Burrow gets drafted, and then they watch Tua Tagovailoa come off the board, and then they end up with Justin Herbert. Now, I'm not saying that this just proves that, definitely don't have to trade up, and it definitely means that the best quarterback isn't going to be the number 1 pick in the draft. That's not the point. My point is that this number 1 overall pick idea isn't exactly without flaws. Especially in a case where I'd imagine that many of you listening think that we should trade up, also think our roster is flawed, and Ballard's done a horrible job, and we have all these deficiencies, and our roster is weak. And while I don't think it's quite as bad as many of you would like to lead some other Colts fans on to believe, there is no denying the fact that we can afford to bring in some talent here, right? Now, that being said, we agree, right? You think that the best way to do that is to give up more draft picks than we've been giving up? After not having had a first-round pick for 3 of the past 4 years, do you want to give up next year's also to get that number 1 pick? Now listen, maybe you're saying, Justin, yes, that is exactly what I would want. You know why? Because I'm tired of the quarterback carousel. I'm tired of kicking the can down the road and replacing Andrew Luck. I'm tired of journeyman. I'm tired of not winning the division, Justin. We need our guy, and we need him right now. All right, fine. Fair enough. I'm listening to you. But let me ask you this. Who is that guy this year? That 100% shoo-in, we know that this is the best guy in the draft. Who are you so sure, just 100% sure, is going to be the guy that saves our franchise and changes the life of the Colts and the fans, being us, for the next 10, 15, 20 years? I'll give you a second. I got news for you. If you're paying attention to what's going on out there, it's pretty quick to conclude. Nobody can agree on who the best guy is in this draft. That's why you have people like me loving Tanner McGee, and then you have people like Bryce Young, and CJ Stroud really is, I think, the best quarterback in the draft, neither here nor there. Point being is no one can agree, and it fully depends on who you ask. And that's fine. And maybe you agree there, or you know what? Maybe you have your guy. Maybe you're the genius of everyone here. Maybe you know more than everyone. Lord knows I'm not the genius. So do me a favor. How about you, who is 100% sure that you know we need Bryce Young? You know we need CJ Stroud. 100% you're willing to risk everything on it. Why don't you call up Chris Ballard, a little speed dial, right? And why don't you tell him who the guy is? So he can give up the necessary assets to trade up with Chicago for that number 1 pick, okay? And when he does, just promise me this. When he listens to you, if he trades up for that number 1 pick and drafts the guy that you want, what you don't get to do is then turn around in 3 to 5 years, if and when that guy doesn't pan out, and turn the gun on Ballard like you weren't lobbying for him to make that decision and draft that guy that he made for you that at that time. All right? Is that fair? Man, sorry, I'm getting worked up. I didn't mean to. I did not mean to, but I'm passionate about it. So that for me right there is the number one pick. If I'm to sum up that angry rant into just like a statement, ultimately, I don't really think that, I don't think it's worth the spoils. I don't think it's worth all the assets to trade up the 3 spots. Ultimately, there's 4 quarterbacks that most people like to some degree. And I'm getting to, even 5. That's my point, right? I think if we stay where we're at, it's the right idea. I don't think we need to get the number 1 pick because I don't think the number 1 pick guarantees us any more success out of the quarterback than a guy we drafted number 4. So that's the number 1 pick. So with that, let's talk about a few more. I mean, while we're here, right? I'm sitting down, we're talking. So trade number 2, I see going out there quite a bit. And, big time quarterback here, Lamar Jackson. No, we should not be trading for Lamar Jackson. And I'm going to tell you, let me preface whatever I'm about to say right now with this. Lamar Jackson is spectacular. Lamar Jackson is a former MVP of this league. Lamar Jackson is one of the top 10 quarterbacks in football. All right? I said it. We've established that. With that, this is a man that wants $250 million guaranteed without ever have even made an AFC championship, let alone win one, let alone make or win the Super Bowl, right? This is a guy whose style of play, and excuse me if I'm old school, I don't care what anyone says, his style of play is one that inherently carries a higher risk of injury. You look at guys like Mike Vick, RG3, Cam Newton. These were guys that were absolutely sensational. But at some point, it caught up. And unfortunately, once these guys that I just mentioned were put into a spot where they were forced to move away from their legs because their bodies let them down, they were never, ever the same. And I'm not saying that's going to happen to Lamar next season. I'm not saying it's going to happen the season after that. But make no mistake, it's an inevitability. It's an inevitability. There it is. Big word, big brain. No big deal. And what I tend to notice when people talk about the quarterback position these days as a rebuttal to something I just said is that they always talk about how all the guys that are winning now, all the best in the league, are scramblers. And while sure, I'll concede that mostly all of them can move, there is a distinct difference between being a scrambling quarterback and a guy who can scramble. And when you hear our new head coach, the great and powerful Shane Steichen, leader of the third Steich, the replacement for Frank Reich. Is the third Steich thing in bad taste? It might be. My mom's side's Jewish. I think I'm allowed to say it. Regardless, Shane has worked with some fantastic quarterbacks. And if you remember his introductory press conference, he did mention the need for a guy who has a big arm, that can improvise, that's an athlete. He mentioned those things, but what he stressed, the biggest point, the biggest takeaway when he was talking about the quarterback position for me was that he was talking about the need for a guy to be firing on all cylinders above the shoulders, aka the ability to process defenses at a rate where he can make the passing game look easy at times, at least. Precision, decisiveness, and an obsession with being the best version of themselves. And now I'm not saying that Lamar doesn't have elite work ethic. I'm not saying he doesn't have a desire and he doesn't put in the work to be the best version of himself. In fact, I have no doubts about that whatsoever. I have no doubts about his character. I think he's very high character. He's done nothing to show anything other than the fact that he's basically class personified in this league. The question for me with Lamar Jackson is becoming this. Is the best version of Lamar Jackson a guy that you could count on to drop back and take over the game with his arm and his ability to pick apart a secondary? At what point, when we talk about Lamar Jackson, are we going to make the transition from criticizing the wide receivers he's been surrounded with to criticizing his ability or lack thereof to get the most out of him? After all, that's what the grades do, right? And everyone's so low on our wide receiver room. How are we so sure that we would get a different results from the Ravens if we brought in Lamar? And at the end of the day, if you're not making the title game, what's the point? You're going to pay him $250 million? I don't know. That's not for me. That trade's not for me. What's it going to cost? You tell me what you'd be comfortable with on a Lamar Jackson trade. I'm curious. Pop it in the comments. Again, I'm all here for the discussion. Okay? I'm not here bringing the news. I'm here bringing my opinion. And of course, I like to have the discussion with you. It's why I'm here. Right. Man, I feel like I'm so angry for this episode. I'm sorry, guys. I feel like I've set a pretty good precedent of not freaking out on this show, but sometimes it's got to be done, right? So, while it may have come off like some sort of Lamar Jackson hater rant, in fact, perhaps it even was, that's where I stand on Lamar right now. I'm just not convinced that he's worth the price of admission at this juncture. All right. So now the third and probably final trade I'll talk about today before wrapping this thing up. This one I'm a little less bullish on. And I'm basically, I think, slipping this in as an excuse to defend this man. I'm talking about Michael Pittman. I feel Colts Nation has soured on Michael Pittman so bad that it's become a bit out of hand. There needs to be someone to come and, balance it out, which is me right now, it seems. But let's get this straight. Michael Pittman, despite what you think, is good. Michael Pittman is damn good. In fact, Michael Pittman may have very well not even hit his peak as a wide receiver yet. Now, I know the gripe with Pittman is that he's not a true bona fide wide receiver one. Sorry he's not Justin Jefferson. Sorry he's not Cooper Kupp. Sorry he's not Mike Evans. But I understand that might be true. And I could almost agree with you right there, although I haven't written him off that's not a possibility, right? But at the same time, when you talk about a true bona fide wide receiver one, what does that even mean? There's 32 teams in this league. So does being a top 32 receiver make him a number one? Technically, that means the top receiver. Do you get what I'm saying? You have 32 teams, the top 32 receivers in the league. Does that make you a wide receiver one? Maybe not. But if Michael Pittman were to be next to someone better than him, make no mistake, Michael Pittman, I don't want to say that. I was going to say anyone that knows anything about football. Not fair to you. Michael Pittman would immediately become one of the best 1B, if you will, wide receivers in football, right? Absolutely, if someone was next to him that was better than Michael Pittman. Now, of course, everything I just said doesn't entirely address the trade discussion. He is entering the last year of his deal. And it does seem likely that he's going to cost, 17, 18 million, just under $20 million a year to keep moving into 2024, 2025, and beyond. So I guess when it comes to the trade discussion, here's my thing. What exactly is the benefit of trading Michael Pittman right now? Just to trade up to the number one slot? And put our young quarterback in a less than favorable spot for all the questions we have about this receiving core? Are there any questions that Michael Pittman is the best guy we have? There shouldn't be. There definitely should not be. And I love Paris, and I love Alec Pierce. But what is Michael Pittman, huh? 25 years old? There's a chance that him and this young guy have great rapport, and our opinion is completely different going into, week 5, 6, 7, and 8, going into that season, right? 25 years old. His fourth season, I just think we're being a little impatient. I just think we're jumping the gun just a little bit. If we're going to trade Michael Pittman, wouldn't it be smarter to do it at the trade deadline of next season if things aren't going our way, right? Why now? In fact, that is literally my question with Michael Pittman in the trade. Why now? What's the benefit? There might be one. I'm curious. I can't figure it out. All right. That is it. You just made it. That's the episode. That has to be the angriest episode I've ever recorded in my entire life. For that, I apologize, unless you enjoyed it, in which case you're welcome. That being said, if you like what you saw, totally, now is the time to subscribe. If you made it this far, you couldn't have hated it that much, right? You have to at least be a Colts fan. You could like the video as well if you haven't on your way out, if you're not ready to make the subscribe. Basically, all those things help the show. All I'm asking you to do as I leave here is if you enjoyed it, just help us one way. And hopefully it doesn't sound like I'm begging, right? And if you've done those things already, and you're just looking, for another way to help this show, you just need another way to help this show. If you could just share it with one person that you know that loves the Colts as much as me, as much as you, whether you think they'll agree with me or disagree. It's not the point. The whole point here is to further the discussion around this team, to create better discussion around this team, and to create civil discussion around this team, despite the fact that I was just hot-headed like Tony Soprano in that one. And with that, I would say that wraps it up. At this point, I'm just rambling. Thank you so much for being here. I will be now every single week of the offseason. I'm back. Now I could have my leg good to go, not swelling up, the whole deal. We're good. See you next week. Goodbye, Colts Nation. Until next time, I'm Justin Alfiero. You just listened to the Ride in the Bench Colts cast.